This happened a year ago or so on a camping trip with my dad in late July or early August. It was a weekend trip, and we were the only ones at the campground. For privacy purposes, I would not state the name of the park we were camping at. I will say, though, that it was in the state of Indiana. Anyway, I woke up with a start one night in my tent. Checking the time on my phone, it read 3:30 a.m. I was hesitant at first to get out of the tent, but my bladder was screaming, which forced me to get up. The sounds of the forest I would have at any other time found comforting, but this time, for some reason, it unnerved me. About 50 yards away and uphill was a porta potty, and since I'm a girl, I can't just pee in the woods. So I grabbed my headlamp, which my mom had loaned to me, turned it on, and headed to the porta potty. I was talking to myself in an attempt to calm my nerves, mostly because I was complaining about my bladder and how dim the headlamp was. The light was so faint that it only illuminated 5 feet in front of me, so I ended up relying on the light of the moon to guide me. I made it to the porta potty without incident, relieved my bladder, then headed back to the tent. Once I was about halfway there, it struck me. The forest was now silent, eerily silent. My mind began imagining the horrors of what was lurking in those woods. Skinwalkers, Wendigos, Bigfoots, who were just waiting for me to get in range so they could snatch me up and eat me. With the speed of an Olympic runner, I sprinted the last 20 yards back to camp. The headlamp's light almost died. Upon arriving at camp and catching my breath, I got the sensation I was being watched, which really started to freak me out. I turned to face the tree line that bordered the lake and saw a pair of large, yellow golden eyes. My tent is very close to this tree line, so whatever this thing was, it was less than 15 feet away. Frozen in fear, I stared back at the eyes. Then my headlamp's light went out, but the eyes of this thing were still glowing. I am a rational person, so I figured it was a coyote or a very large stray dog, and my headlamp's light was just reflecting off of the eyes, giving the illusion that they were glowing. So when my headlamp's light went out, I expected the eyes to do the same. However, they did not. They were indeed glowing a gold yellow. Terrified, I took a few steps back and lost my balance, falling straight onto my butt. The eyes were getting closer, and the moonlight shone on this creature, revealing a silhouette that in no way matched the size of a coyote or a dog. This thing was far larger and appeared to be on its hind legs. If I had to guess, this creature stood taller than 6 feet and had a hunched over body. It had the head of a dog. If I had to take a guess, it looked like the head was the shape of a husky or one of those wolf dogs or something. Now, I know most people, when they talk about encountering these dog men, they mention a strong feeling of malevolence coming from the creature. But oddly enough, I kind of felt the opposite. The eyes of the creature did not seem to hold any sort of malice or intent to harm me. Rather, I got the sense that it was curious, or at the very least confused. After engaging in a staring contest with this creature, which probably lasted only a minute, the creature got back to all fours and retreated into the forest. But it seemingly made no sounds that did so. I don't know if this was a dog man. I know for sure it wasn't a bear. We don't even have grizzlies in Indiana, and black bears aren't all that common. I'm at a loss as to what this creature was. It left no tracks behind in the muddy banks of the lake, which seems almost impossible. Well, what do you guys think? This occurred last July. I remember this time frame so well because it happened the day after I saw Panic at the Disco at Madison Square Gardens. The day after the concert, so the 25th I think, I was playing Animal Crossing at my dad's house. He wasn't home, so I was the only other one in the house besides my cat. I heard a knock at the door. It was later in the afternoon, maybe around 6 p.m., so I started to walk to the door, not thinking about it. My dad's house has a large one-way window next to the door, so I was able to see who was outside. I assumed it was a kid from the neighborhood, so I opened the door. It was a boy. He looked a little lost, so I asked if he needed anything. He said no, and asked if he could come inside. I asked why, and he just shrugged and stood there with a blank expression. I was confused by this, and was torn on what to do. This boy was a child, only about 6 years old if I had to guess. I then remembered the whole stranger danger thing, even though it was a child and I'm a 19-year-old female. The boy asked if he could come in again, and I asked, "Why do you want to come in?" He gave me an answer, and it was kind of unsettling. He said something along the lines of, "My parents will come looking for me soon." I was confused and thought this boy was just terrified to be on his own. I looked at his eyes, for whatever reason, and the eye sockets were empty and black. I couldn't really tell why they were that way. It was so weird. My body began to speak almost on his own, and long story short, ended up letting him in. I couldn't stop myself. It was almost like pressure, or he was making me do it or something. It was almost like a form of mind control. Even though I knew it felt so unlike me, as I was pretty anxious around new people that I've never met, especially some random child who had never shown up at your house before. He came inside. He sat on the chair in the entryway. I was uncomfortable, and I could tell this child did not want to speak at all. I opened my DS to resume the game and it froze. I tried to turn it off and back on without saving my progress, and it wouldn't even do that. I brushed that off as a coincidence and just me being paranoid. After what felt like eons, the child stood up and said, "They're here?" He got up, walked out of the door. I watched him get into the car, and as he was leaving, my dad was driving in front of the house, pulling into the driveway. My dad got inside and asked who that boy was. I responded with the whole story minus the black eyes and my DS now working, because my dad's a skeptic about that kind of stuff. I then made up that I called the boy's parents to come pick him up. That was obviously a lie. I told my friend about this, the one who is very into cryptids and all things unknown. She thinks that I probably had an experience with black-eyed children. I'm no paranormal expert, but it felt very unhuman-like. I've never seen a child with completely black eyes who seems so lifeless. Anyways, thank you for reading my story. I hope it makes it onto a video. I have never shared this story with anyone before. Keep in mind, this is 100% true. I'm a very experienced hunter, and I've been hunting since I was 7. I have never encountered anything this strange until the fall of 2017. I woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning to get an early start. I like to get to my tree stand before daylight so I don't spook any of the deer in the area. I noticed that it was very quiet that morning. No bugs were making their usual noises. No early morning birds were chirping like they usually do. I thought it was kind of creepy, but nothing I should be concerned about. I climbed into my tree stand and got settled. I still had about an hour before daylight, so I figured I would get into that half-asleep, half-awake state for a while. After about 30 minutes, I heard footsteps really far away. I could hear them clearly, since it was still not a sound going on around me. I figured it wasn't just a deer. I went back to sleep. I next felt my tree stand shake a little. I thought that was weird, seeing as it could not hear or feel any wind. I looked down and saw a black outline of a person standing at the bottom of my tree, looking up at me. I thought, what the hell is he doing? As I looked for my flashlight, I got out my flashlight and turned it on, which I really regret doing. Where I turned it on, I saw a big hairy thing standing at the bottom of my stand. It growled and started shaking the tree stand all about. I had my handgun in my holster on my waist. I poured out and shot 2 shots into the ground about 5 feet away from it. It ran until I couldn't see it with my flashlight. About 10 seconds later, I heard a deep, long roar. After more footsteps going over the hill, I haven't gone back since. I still hunt, but nowhere near that location for fear I might come into contact with whatever that was again. This happened back when I was 12 or 13 years old. Now, a little backstory here. My dad and I volunteered at a bird banding station. If you don't know what bird banding is, it's where researchers put small metal bands on the legs of birds and then release them to track their migration patterns. We'd set out mist nets in the woods to catch the birds. We used nets instead of traditional traps so we wouldn't harm the birds. So anyway, the guy who owned the bird banding station and the entire property, let's call him R, would let me wander the woods while he was collecting birds out of the nets. R's property was massive, with woods, countryside, marshland, you name it. Now back to the story. It was a cool summer morning. I was wandering in my usual part of the forest. It wasn't long before I noticed that it was unusually silent, which was odd. I usually hear at least one thrush or blue jay, but there was nothing. All of a sudden, in the distance, I hear what sounds like a distressed baby deer or cat. Being the curious animal lover I was, I followed the noise. However, as I got closer to the sound, it seemed to grow a lot further away. It wasn't long before I came to the edge of R's property. The wailing sounded like it was coming from nearby 1 minute, from sounding far away the next. Despite being confused and a little creeped out, I still followed it. A few moments later, I came across a small deer blind. I looked inside to see if anyone was messing with me, but nobody was there. When I got a better look at the blind, I noticed something a little bit off about it. It looked like there were massive slashes on the sides. They looked like if a person had slashed them with a knife or an animal's claw marks. But there were no bears in my part of Michigan. Odd. So being the curious 13-year-old I was, I continued on my way to find this distressed animal. I was walking along the edge of R's woods, trying not to go too far. I'm starting to get frustrated. Where the heck was this scream coming from? So being the naive little girl I was, I mimicked the noise right back at the animal to see if it would show herself. Not a minute passes by, and I hear a noise that I will never forget. It sounded like a dog's growl, mixed with a buck's grunt. No deer sounded like it. Something in my brain told me to get the heck out of there, and I did, leaping over twigs and branches until I'm in R's front yard. As I make my way towards his house, I hear the growl coming from the woods about 10 meters behind me. So instead, I run towards the research sack, since R wasn't at the house and the doors would most likely be locked. I knew that no one would believe me, so I just said that a deer growled at me. However, I have heard deer grunts and snorts all my life, and they do not even compare to what I heard this animal make. It didn't sound like a coyote or a dog either. Although I never saw anything, I believe that it was trying to lure me off the property to do who knows what. I'm guessing that it may have been a Wendigo, since they can mimic noises of other animals and even voices. I also live near the Great Lakes, a hot spot for Wendigo sightings. Maybe it was even a skinwalker, but they tend to be more in the western states, so whatever is in my woods, I don't know. But anytime I go there, I don't go there alone anymore. Don't just brush off something that seems odd. Always follow your gut. This didn't happen to me personally, but to my older brother. We used to live in a very rural area of Western Canada. The closest town was probably populated with about 1,000 people, maybe even less. It was about a 15-minute drive away from where I was. There's a small village up the hill with a small convenience store and an old abandoned hockey rink. Across from the rink, along the highway, sits the old reservation school. Around the school were multiple portable classrooms, all of them abandoned after the new school was built 6 to 5 years earlier. At night, it gets super dark with the only light coming from the village, or in this night, the moon. My brother had a few of his friends with him, and they decided to go climb or break into the old school or the surrounding buildings. He and two of his friends couldn't get into the main building, so they decided to climb onto one of the portables. He and one of his friends easily climbed on. His third friend was shorter and had a harder time. When they tried helping him up, they saw a fourth person around the corner. His friend was on the ground and heard a noise. Someone else is here. They looked in the direction of the noise and saw someone standing there. My brother asked if it was interested in joining them. He said it looked startled and ran to the open field behind the school. Now, the only light they had was the full moon, but he said it looked like a human, but it had pale skin, long arms and legs, and wings. The thing stopped running, looked back at them and flew into the air. My brother and his friend on the roof of the portable thing jumped off. He told me his third friend on the ground was running back to the village already. All three of them made it to the village in 3 minutes. When they got back to the village, they went on to one of my friend's house. My brother called my mom to pick him up, so off she went. The next day, my brother finally told my mom what happened. He doesn't like talking about it until this day. It interests me, but also terrified me, because I know my brother is not easily scared, and he's not really known to be a liar either. But he is terrified of that night. To start off, I used to be a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. I never believed in ghosts, aliens, and so forth. Also to add, I don't scare easy. I do a lot of martial arts and other things. Also, I'm not exactly the greatest at writing, but this is based on what we saw and what happened. Anyways, on to the story. My friends, Jason, Michael, and I, had planned to go camping in Wrightwood, California for the weekend. So we get there at about 4:30 p.m. with enough light to set up all the tents. It's all normal until about 9 p.m. when we all start hearing noises coming from the left where we were all sitting. We brushed it off as wildlife, so we continue to catch up with one another due to having daily life getting in the way, and then we all hear claws digging into the trees behind us. My friend Jason grabbed his gun, just in case, because there are mountain lions and black bears in this forest. So a few minutes go by, and we don't hear anything else. So we all settle down and continue catching up, having a few drinks and just hanging out. I wish I could joke about the sound we heard next. It was a loud howl, coming from the right of us. I can't put a distance of how far, but I could tell it was pretty close. We decided it'd be best just to stay quiet. By this time, it was about 12 a.m., and my friend Michael said he just saw something that was probably about 5 feet tall dash between the trees and told me to get my flashlight out. I pointed the flashlight to where he said, and this creature stands on 2 feet easily towering over us. If I had to guess, my friend was wrong. This thing was way bigger than 5 feet. It was easily 8 feet. It had a face just like a dog, and grayish-black fur all over its body. It was weird. It had a body that was similar to a black bear, but way more masculine. Luckily, Jason fired a few rounds at it, and it seemed to scare it away. As for us, we made a mad dash to our trucks and got the heck out of there. We did come back in the morning to get our tents and stuff. They were all ripped to shreds though. I don't know what happened to the tents. We also checked out the trees and there were deep claw marks carved all in them. I can tell you what we saw was not a black bear, and I'm honestly scared of what I saw. So if you ever go to Wrightwood, California for camping, be very, very careful. Take protection. You never know what you're going to find out in those woods. Not everything out there has been documented by man. I was about 5 years old when this happened. Most people wouldn't remember this much from this age, but this event scarred me for life. It happened in Shallow Water, Kansas. A small town just outside of Scott City is where I was born. I was playing outside in my great-grandmother Ruth's backyard. It was a normal day. The sky was clear. It was warm. There was a slight breeze, but that was normal in Kansas. Everything was going great. Well, that is, until I looked at the roof of the school that was across the dirt road from my grandma's house. I looked up, and there this thing was, just watching me. I'm getting goosebumps just now, typing this. It was standing on top of the school. It was about 4 to 5 feet tall, and it had large red eyes and very large wings. It looked like something straight from hell. The wings were like bat wings. They were a dark brown. The creature itself was all black with a massive scar on its left leg, like it had been shot or stabbed. If you have ever seen the movie E.T., its head looked very familiar to that. As soon as it knew, I realized it was there watching me. It jumped off the roof and started walking towards me. I was paralyzed in fear. It walked until it was about 30 feet from me. At the time, I was crying and I stood up and ran back to my grandmother's house as fast as I could. If it wanted me dead, then I wouldn't be writing this. It could have gotten me. There's no doubt about that. As soon as I ran inside, tears flowing down my face, everyone asked me what was wrong. I replied with, I just saw some creature. That's all I could say. I don't know why, but it just seemed like something about this creature was pure predator and it just wanted me. Later in life, when I was about 10, me and my dad were talking about it. He said that wasn't the first time he had experienced something like that. He told me he had seen it kill his dog and a few cats when he was a teenager. He said that he shot it in the leg with his rifle and it flew off. I'm 17 now and I refuse to go back to that town without a weapon. I don't know what it was, but I know it was a carnivore, and I'm lucky to be alive today. So if you're ever around the Shallow Water, Kansas area, I'm warning you. Don't forget your gun. You never know when you may need it. There's definitely more than meets the eye out there. This is not my story, but my cousin's, and I thought people would enjoy it. This story happened to me back in the summer of 2010. I was working for a major landscaping company, and the crew I was a part of was the smallest crew. There was just 3 of us. Our job was to prepare new locations for landscaping. We always got to the really cool locations and pretty much do nothing all day. It's that small stuff, planting grass, watering trees, etc. Anyway, you get the point. We had been dispatched to a new warehouse that was being built. The grounds were absolutely massive, so we had a lot of ground to cover. We started early in the morning around 8 a.m. The day seemed like it was going by quick. Just to note, the warehouse was in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's what it felt like anyway. I do remember that in the distance I could see a row of massive electric tower lines, maybe 300 yards or so away, and from there, a clear sky. Around lunchtime, the other guys wanted to go grab some lunch. I had brought my lunch from home, so I agreed to stay with the trailer. They took off and I began to sit against a trailer and eat my lunch. I was facing the power lines. I noticed something coming in the distance. At first, it looked like a black glider, but I didn't understand why anyone would be using a glider so close to power lines. I saw this jet black glider fly over the power lines. Now this quote-unquote glider was maybe 100 yards away. To my shock, I noticed this was no glider, but a bird. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could a bird be this big? The bird then took a quick U-turn and started back from where it came. I took off towards this thing. It was of course way too fast for me to catch. It flapped its wings and took off, just missing the power lines it seemed. In my quick dash, I noticed I had dropped my old flip phone, which I was going to use to attempt a video of this thing. I have seen a California condor, I have seen a crane and turkey vulture. This was nothing that even comes close. This thing was 10 times the size. To gather a good perspective of its size, I would say that it was at the very least 30 feet in wingspan. So, it's definitely interesting, and I don't know what it was. I've done some reading, and I think it could be a thunderbird, but I don't know. I was 5 when this incident took place. My brother and I moved in to live with our nan and pop a few months earlier, as our mom abandoned us that year in 1986. Nan and Pop's house had a farm in the Tasmanian country, and there was a beautiful bushland on the right side of the house. I frequently went to the small clearing in the bush, which was visible from the house, so Nan was okay with me going there to pick beautiful smelling beronia flowers. To the story. It was around 5 p.m. when I went to the clearing in the bush. As it was daylight savings, there were 4 hours left of sunlight, so wasn't considered a bad time of day to go and pick beronia. As I picked my last flower to go home, all the birds that were tweeting away, the sound of the slight breeze and common bush sounds suddenly stopped. My young kind couldn't grasp any reason why that was so. I went to walk home, and then I heard footsteps crunching into the dry gun leaves and dead bracken. I got a little scared, and then I heard a voice saying, "Becky? Becky, it's me." I heard my mom's softly nervous voice. It was a little off though. I said, Mom, where are you?" At that point, I was starting to cry a little, thinking my mom had come back. But the voice repeated, "Becky, Becky, it's me." Then the footsteps I heard earlier were closer to me, and the smell of the beronia was overtaken by the stench of off milk. I gagged a little and tried to head home, hoping for some fresh air. But a figure came out into the clearing, moving slowly, like a baby learning to walk. As he got closer, I realized it was an animal on 2 legs, mangy looking and looked starved. Its eyes had a glowing green and yellow color, and they were staring straight at me. I was so scared. I stood there petrified. It looked like some animal I've seen before in a book or a video. The beige matted coat and brown stripes on each side of that thing's body. It said in front of me, Berkey, it's me. It was trying to lure me by talking like my mom. I dropped the flowers and I ran out of the small clearing through the trees. And as I was about to jump the fence, the creature was running towards me with my flowers in its raw and snarling looking mouth. Just then, it let out an evil, ear-piercing screech. Then I screamed in terror. But I got over the fence, and when I caught my breath back, I noticed it was dark. I saw torches, and I heard a police radio towards the house. I got to the veranda, and Nan and Pop were there, and they just held me so tight. They had police and neighbors looking for me. I wasn't in trouble, but they knew I was frightened. I told them I don't remember going further into the bush. They even heard the screech of that thing in the scrub. It turns out I was missing in the bush for 5 hours. It was around 10 p.m. when I ran back home. I didn't understand how that was possible. After it happened, at school, we were learning about extinct animals in Australia. I went white when I saw a picture of a thylacine. Something evil was trying to pose as a messed-up-looking Tasmanian tiger. That horrible evening has made me despise the smell of Boronia for years, which I once loved. Now I'm 37. I can have those flowers in my home without being triggered into fear again. That was the first and last time I encountered that creature.